The end of the decade and the end of the year. For a look back and a look ahead, we are joined by Rick Green and Kevin Rennie of the Hartford Courant, and Kevin also of Daily Ructions. And gentlemen, great to see you here on the program today. So it is the end of a decade. We began the decade with Jody Rell as governor, ended with Ned Lamont, a lot of years with Dan Malloy in between. How would you sum up the decade politically, Kevin?
I think that it was, in large measure, the state becoming a more democratic state, and the Republican Party, with a few exceptions, becoming sort of a rump and not having a lot of influence based on its numbers. Came close to electing a governor a couple times, but not much else.
3 Republican losses in that period.
Yes. 2
by Tom Foley, another one by just most recently, Ned Lamont beating Bob Stefanowski. Do you agree with Kevin's assessment? The state's becoming much more blue?
Undoubtedly. I guess I would go up a little higher here and just look at it. It's been a lost decade. Connecticut has lost opportunity here. We did not enjoy the recovery that the rest of the nation enjoyed after the Great Recession. We haven't gained our jobs back. The housing market hasn't returned. And this last legislative session, another lost year. What are we doing to solve the big problems facing Connecticut?
How would you rate Governor Lamont's first year in office?
I would rate it as a little bit of a disappointment. I do think he is trying hard, but the abandoning his campaign promise on tolls is having far-reaching ramifications. And trust in state government has been diminishing in Connecticut at an alarming rate. And I do think that he missed an opportunity to start restoring that.
Was the defeat of tolls, though, or the lack of tolls being implemented, sort of the big political story of last year, this year?
I guess I'd call that the political failure of the year. The fact that we're still talking about tolls in December, and there's no way they're going to deal with it in January. It'll drag on through the session. How could we possibly still be talking about tolls when we have all of these other issues facing Connecticut? So yeah, I think they blew that there. Let's hope that they can get through that and move on to other more important things.
Did you see any trends in the municipal elections in November, Kevin, that might?
I saw a small trend. I think I saw a small trend, which was, unlike 2017, 2 years before, I do think that rather than trying to, some places sending a message to Republicans and Donald Trump, I do think that this year's municipal elections were more locally based in the results.
The biggest news story, at least in television news, newspaper as well, was the disappearance of Jennifer Dulos, which is still dominating the headlines. Did that surprise you, the reaction and the interest in it, Rick?
Well, it was just the story that keeps on giving. I mean, and I guess I'm not surprised in, wealth, disappearance, children, long-running divorce. No, it doesn't surprise me that's grabbed hold of us.
And all the different towns involved, too.
Yeah.
I mean, it had all the elements of a modern crime drama, and also the sort of bafflement at why no one has been arrested yet for what certainly appears to be a murder. And so I do think that it has captivated the state's interest in what happens now.
I want to ask you too. The shocking death of our friend Denise DeCenzo was just stunning to the entire state. I think we were all, in fact, I was talking to her husband, they were just sort of blown away by how much she was revered across the whole state and how much this deeply impacted people. How would you explain that, Rick? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think it's part of, as we were saying earlier, Dennis, when we were talking, she had become part of people's lives and part of the routine. And you remove that, and it seems like all is not well with your world and someone you could trust. Especially in this day and age, when you don't know what media sources to trust sometimes, that's pretty powerful.
I know you got to work with her election night, Kevin.
I did, right here. And it was, of course, I always thought it was, I was always sort of honored to sit at the desk with Denise. And when we were here for those almost 3 hours, I was reminded again of just what a seamless professional she was. First, she was a pleasure to be with, even off camera, on camera. She was the same person, but on election night, there's a lot of back and forth because there's so many reporters live at various candidate headquarters, and sitting where you're sitting now and watching it come off without a hitch was was really just an education that in my advancing years I don't get very often. And I would just say, people have seen me with Denise every now and then on television, but I've been surprised at the number of people who come up to me to talk about it. I mean, I've said to you that the state has been awash in tears, and
it's been tough. We're going to be hearing from some of our coworkers coming up a little bit later in the program. Let's shift to 2020 though, and let's talk about what the governor can and wants to accomplish. Rick, let's begin with you. Obviously, he wants to get this transportation thing done.
Yeah, but let's also remember that this is a presidential election year. It's an election year for the General Assembly. We're not going to see a lot of courageous activity over there in Hartford, but certainly they've got to do something with transportation. Absolutely, they've got to move on from that. And then he really has got to kind of turn back again to the economy. Are you going to focus on attracting new businesses? How about aid to the state's cities? Are you going to continue to support Hartford at the level that they've been supporting Hartford?
If you look at some of the elections this past year, Gennaro Bizzarro comes to mind, also Linda Austin lost in Sprague. They were both, successful and a victim of the tolls issue because Bizzarro campaigned on that. Do you see that as being one of those things that some lawmakers are going to be like, I just don't want to go there right now?
I think that's why we're where we are.
We've seen it already.
It was a mistake. I don't know why Ned Lamont made this the centerpiece of his first year in office. Just getting the budget balance should have been something that he would have wanted to shine a light on. It was all overshadowed by his at times obsession with tolls, and even going to the extent of saying I'm staking my governorship on this. And there was really no predicate. There was no groundwork laid for this, and the plans kept changing. And I really think he should have spent the first year explaining to people why he wants to do something big.
Except that there has to be an honest discussion about how we're going to pay for these transportation improvements that we can all generally agree have to be made if we want to advance our economy. I mean, are you going to pay for it through taxes? Are you going to cut things to pay for it? Are you going to borrow? I mean, there aren't that many options here, and we have to have an honest discussion about that.
Well, he's had a lot of different plans.
Yeah.
And so that has, it's sort of like you're watching this debate with himself. And as people who've read my column know, I've had some internal emails, and certainly Mrs. Lamont understands that it was a very big mistake to abandon his campaign promise of trucks only
so early in the administration,
and that the consequence of that is felt in all sorts of other areas.
Yeah.
And to you, Dennis, they were not successful in getting you to change your viewer poll. That's how much they pay. That's right.
So just to refresh our viewers, they ran
You ran a poll, and there was an email that at 9 o'clock and 32 seconds, Anne Lamont is sending an email to the staff saying, could we put some pressure on Face the State to change that question?
We did not. We did not.
You did not.
And my apologies to Senator Osten. I called her Linda. Her name is Kathy, of course. Let's talk a little bit about the congressional races, the 5 seats up for grabs. Do we see any changes at all? Because these have really been in place for a little bit.
I mean, unless Kevin's got some inside knowledge here, I don't see any changes. You look to the 5th district and you say, oh, this is a district where there's a sizable Republican population, and then you see the craziness that's going on there right now with one candidate posting, disgusting tweets. No, I don't see any changes.
Some Democrats in other states have been challenged by fellow Democrats saying they weren't liberal enough. Do you see that happening anywhere in the state?
If there are going to be changes, that's where it would be.
Like you take someone like in the 1st district here, you might think that they're.
That someone doesn't think Larson's
somebody
liberal
takes
enough?
Larson on, nobody on the horizon. Don't see it.
And you have to raise so much money that you need to start now. Even though the primary is in September, you really need to get going.
What about the legislative makeup? Do Republicans, can they make inroads? What do they have to do?
I don't see any sign that we're going to see great inroads, but the session here might tell us a lot.
Is there a politician this year who may be making some moves to run for governor in 2022 this coming year that you might see?
Well, I think that Susan Bysiewicz always makes moves to run for governor. She's run 3 or 4 times already. So she is, if
Aaron Stewart, maybe? Do you see her
could be, but she'd have to get through one more re-election in 2021.
I think there's a real willingness to give Ned Lamont one more shot here. I think his first year, he hasn't really proven a lot of opportunity still ahead of him here.
Rick Green, Kevin Rennie, we thank you so much, and Happy New Year to both of you.
Thanks, Dennis.
In a moment, some of our staffers remember Denise DiCenzo. And we welcome your comments on social media. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.